Prologue. The raids no one spoke about. In the winter of 1927 to 1928, the federal government swept into the decaying New England port of Innsmouth with a discretion that felt louder than any siren. Trains avoided the place. The roads in were thin as veins. And still, overnight, men appeared with federal credentials and a practiced habit of not answering questions. Mass arrests were made, and yet, quiet, unphotographed. Something you would expect to see on a large case like this. Whole blocks along the waterfront deliberately burned and blasted, then stamped flat as if the sea itself had requested clearance. Newspapers hinted at prohibition busts and public health, but never produced names, charges, images, or trials. The town was almost emptied, then left to settle under its ashes. The story, however, slipped off the front page as if the town had swallowed it. But there were rumors of something else transpiring there. A great mistake of nature from the sea the government needed to keep hidden. I didn't know then what came out of the water, nor what was forced back down. I only knew the silence around Innsmouth was practiced, like a family secret polished by years of not being spoken.
The Shadow over Innsmouth, a modern retelling of H.P. Lovecraft's novella. Robert Olmsted, narrator of this tale, recalls an unexpected detour and a curiosity that will change the course of his life.
Chapter 1. A cheaper route, a costlier curiosity. Part 1. Newburyport, late afternoon, 4 months earlier. I hadn't planned on visiting Innsmouth, nor did I hear about the town until today. I just turned 21, celebrating my adulthood with a shoestring budget tour of New England. Maps folded to the margins, pencil notes in the gutters, churches to see, graveyards to admire, family names to chase down in courthouse ledgers. At the Newburyport train station, the plan was to trek to Arkham. I demurred at the high fare of the ticket and was told by fellow travelers it was the only way to get there, except for one man who pointed me to the ticket office and asked for other means of travel. I approached the counter and inquired about alternative routes to Arkham. The ticket booth operator, stocky, not from around here by the way he pronounced the vowels.
Well, I know about an old bus that comes to town. You could take that thing, I suppose,
he said with a certain hesitation.
But it ain't spoken of much out here. It goes through Innsmouth. You may have heard about that, and so the people don't like it. Run by an Innsmouth fellow, Joe Sargent, but he never gets any customers from here, or Arkham either, I guess. It's a wonder it keeps running at all. I suppose it's cheap enough, but I never see more than 2 or 3 people in it. Nobody but those Innsmouth folks. It leaves from the front of Hammond's drugstore across the street at 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. Looks like a terrible rattle trap. I've never beaten on it.
I noticed he pronounced the town Innsmouth, letting the middle syllables slide into each other like something he'd rather not hold on his tongue. Asking around the station, folks avoided the subject of Innsmouth. The way people refused to talk about it cinched the deal. Curiosity is a door that opens in one direction. I walked through, ready to see this mysterious place of whispered rumor. Part 2. The reading rooms and the tiara. With time to spare and wanting to know more about the place I was about to visit, I tried the usual places for intel in Newburyport first. Lunch counters, workshop garages, hardware stores, small talk that buckled when the topic bent toward Innsmouth. So I went where paper tells what people won't, the public library. County histories gave me the same vague outlines, as if the author had kept one eye on the door while writing. Shipyards and whale oil money before the War of 1812, a bustling refinery on the Manassas River afterward, then the long downward plunge into decay, Mills closing, fisheries failing, and an article about a mysterious plague in 1846 that left half the population dead and those that survived with a habit of drawing their window curtains before dark. That night, in the Newburyport Museum of History, the town's curator let me into a back room. Hearing about my questioning of the town, he was eager to show me something of interest, but dared not speak of it in front of others. In the center of the study, a glass case with a peculiar crown, taller than a tiara should be, its pale gold surface with submarine gleam chased with designs that didn't sit comfortably inside any art history I knew. Not Greek waves or Celtic knots, not Polynesian curves or Asian clouds, and yet it carried the assurance of an old tradition perfected somewhere far from classrooms. The figures along the rim were the part my brain tried to reject. Creatures that split the difference between fish and human with a confidence that felt sacrilegious. The longer I looked, the more a wrong kind of familiarity pressed in. Like the designs were remembering me. Compelled, unsettled, and slightly seasick, the beauty and disgust itself veered too close to resembling something alive and looking back. Maps spread, I found the bus times and traced routes with the stub of a golf pencil. If Innsmouth sat where the roads grew thin and the marshes grew wide, then it was exactly the kind of place that keeps its own hours in history. In the morning, I'd go. The port of Innsmouth was calling, like I had chosen a book at random and discovered it had been waiting with my name tucked inside. Chapter 2. The First Look at Innsmouth. Part 4. The Driver. The bus arrived a few minutes early, 9:56 a.m., a derelict LGOCB-type bus, stained with salt and dirt plastered on from the sea's winds. It was a tired gray box with windows filmed by road dust. The driver, Joe Sargent according to the card clipped on the wheel, stood too tall for how he held himself. His shoulders drooped forward as if his torso had been hung on new hinges. His skin had the dry, chalky look of someone who'd just changed bandages. His eyes were a pale, constant blue that didn't seem to blink on the schedule the rest of us use. The creasings along his neck looked like scars or something half-healed. I assumed they were old injuries. Up close, I wasn't sure. Part 5. The Ride to Innsmouth. The view from the window, marshlands unrolled, flat water the color of pewter, stubble grass blown into commas by the wind, telegraph poles with just 2 wires like a promise kept in half. Then the road climbed a long, slow grade and broke over a ridge. Innsmouth sprawled below us, a shingled bruise beside a stilted harbor. Steeples with their clock faces punched out stared seaward like skulls. The breakwater's old stones showed their backs to the surf. Beyond them, the ocean lay unyielding and merciless with waves, like a plate of hammered steel. Farther still, a low black spine cut the surface of the water. It was Devil Reef. Too close to be an island, too stubborn to be a rock you ignored. It was as if a map had shrugged and admitted there were places it only pretended to know. Part 6. Through the port town. We rattled down into streets where many windows had been crudely boarded up with wood and nail. Those who watched the bus pass had faces I didn't want to sketch. Mouths that rested open a fraction too wide. Eyes that kept their shine too long without blinking. In the town's open square, a Greek revival hall with flaking paint held a weathered sign. Esoteric Order of Dagon. Across from it, a squatted Gothic church perched on a high shuttered basement. Its door stood ajar. A rectangle of darkness hung there like an accusation. Something moved through it. Robes, a tall, pale crown that threw back a memory of the glass case I'd peered into last night. And for a moment, a shape filled the doorway that my mind tried to label and then declined to name. It felt like someone had spoken my name from a room I hadn't realized I'd been standing inside. Part 7. The Grocery Boy. Getting off the bus, information in Innsmouth came easiest from people who weren't from Innsmouth. In a chain grocery, a 17-year-old boy from Arkham drew me a careful pencil map on a brown paper bag. Federal Street down from the square. Rich houses up on Washington Street with their shuttered third stories. The waterfront slums east on Main and Water Street. He put the pencil down and paused for a moment. He could see the intrigue on my face, eager to explore every inch of the port. His advice was that of caution. Avoid the Dagon Hall and any church that still held services. Don't wander north of the river at night. Don't linger near the refinery. He said if I wanted stories about the town, I should find Zadok Allen, almost 100 years old. A part-time oracle and full-time drunk. He'd talk if I paid him in the language his throat preferred, a splash of whiskey. The map gave me a clear lay of the land now, and the boy's words gave me a path to follow. Part 8. Walking the town of Innsmouth. I walked the streets in a loose loop to learn the shape of the place. The waterfront was a mouth with too many missing teeth. Piers rotted back to their pilings, warehouses leaning like old men who've forgotten how to stand. Seagulls perched on chimney pots, watchful and unpersuaded. Up the hill, Washington Street's mansions kept their dignity the way widows do. Shutters closed, lawns gone to seed, third-story windows fastened so tight it felt philosophical. Between, in the grid of narrow lanes, I saw two kinds of motion: the furtive watchfulness of those who didn't want attention, and the hollow stillness of houses that had made a profession of being empty. It was as if the town inhaled only when no one watched, then held its breath when I turned my head. Part 9. Finding Zadok. Near the fire station, I found him, Zadok Allen, propped on a bench in the shade, a beard that looked assembled from last winter's grass, and a pair of eyes washed to the paleness of old laundry. Two firemen in shirt sleeves nodded to him as they would to a fixture rather than a man. When I flashed the neck of a bottle, he rose like a weather vane answering the wind. Chapter 3. Zadok's Whisper and the Weight of Water. Part 10. The Broken Wharf. We walked, his shuffle, my quick step, to a broken back lane that coughed us out onto a grass-choked wharf nobody used. The tide fiddled with the stonework like a locksmith short on time. I rationed the whiskey in mouthfuls, paced to the rhythm of his sentences. He talked nonsense first, as the elderly do, to see whether you'll stay for the sense. Then the past rose through him like a diver breaking surface. His words. What came out in a shaking whisper didn't sound like myth. It sounded like cached truth. As if a cracked bell had been struck just right and found its note again. Part 11. Captain Obed and the Island. Zadok told me the tale of Captain Obed Marsh, a trader with 3 ships and the kind of restless mind that reads prophet like a weather report. Somewhere east of Otaheite, Captain Marsh found an island with stonework too old to be anyone's grandfather's. Bas-reliefs rubbed by centuries of fingers and spray, figures with the same wrong, fish-like elegance as the tiaras. The islanders wore jewelry of a pale, strange metal and had bounties of fish when others starved. The elder of the island carried with him a golden and lead charm around his neck as Captain Marsh approached. He was entranced by their abundance and wanted to know how they thrived in otherwise low-yield seasons. Their secret, once coaxed out by gifts and glass beads, was a covenant with the deep-water folk, beings who lived in a city on the sea floor, who visited a nearby volcanic islet rising sudden from deep water, and who brought shoals of fish like shepherds driving flocks. The bargain demanded feasts and ceremonies, and in hungry seasons or by older custom, sacrifices. Zadok continued the tale. After learning the secrets of the islanders, Captain Marsh brought back more than cargo. A leaden charm with grooves like a mouth, with books and ritual rites that made old scriptures look like tourist brochures. Innsmouth's economy had been thinning, so the men were hungry enough to listen. Captain Marsh's tale of the islanders and their covenant spawned a new and fervent way of life for the town. First came fish. boiling into nets like a miracle you pretended not to look at, but ended up looking too closely. Then came gold. Pale ingots melted down at the refinery, whose books about them didn't bear deep inspection. The traditional churches emptied, the patrons left the modern religion behind, and filled the esoteric order of Dagon, which promised not heaven, but results, and dressed its leaders in crowns whose metal the town had not mined. It couldn't last without a reckoning, though. In 1846, some of the Innsmouth men who still believed old traditions had enough and followed Marsh's boats to Devil Reef with guns and righteous talk. Obed Marsh was killed. There were arrests, cells filled with his followers, but the sermons sharpened behind the bars. The townsfolk thought that was the end of it. But then came a night when the harbor moved. Creatures rushed from the sea. Ill-fated shapes climbed the breakwater and advanced through the streets in a thick salt smell that settled in the lungs. Doors rattled. Windows shook. Families moved their heaviest furniture to blockade the frame. Then they prayed. In the morning, the jail cells were found empty, the pulpits silent. Innsmouth belonged to the new order. The mysterious plague everyone spoke about was nothing but a convenient cover story for anyone who didn't cooperate. After that night, the sermons changed from metaphors to instructions. The Deepwater folk were not only allies, they demanded they were kin, waiting to be recognized. The town folk were forced to marry the sea people. The children born of certain unions looked ordinary until they didn't, eyes widening and shining too much, skin losing the old texture of land dwellers, fine creases appearing at the neck, like the preface to another way of breathing. When the change ripened, the elders went into the water and did not die. Zadok said they visited from time to time, like great-grandparents dropping by, only when the tide was right. The tale of Obed Marsh and the Deepwater folk ends. Words reverberating like immortality had been redefined in a language I didn't speak, but suddenly understood. Part 12. Watching from the Depths. After Zadok told the story, the silence on the wharf was deafening. The seagulls' squawking dissipated into quiet drones of the wind. He lowered his voice further and watched the reef, eyes darting back and forth as if to catch someone eavesdropping. He spoke in a murmur.
The Deepwater folk had been bringing things up from their city beneath the sea, things that needed storage in the boarded houses between Main and Water Street.
The way he said things made the word itself feel unsafe. He leaned in with an expression of disbelief in what he was about to ask.
You ever heard of a shoggoth?
The syllables sliding like oil across stone. At that moment, we caught a glimpse of something in the water, sending a slick of moonlight rolling the wrong way, like a whale's back as it breaks the surface. It was swimming towards us. Zadok's face turned pale in an instant, then cracked with a fear so clean it sobered him like a slap.
They've seen us.
He breathed, his hand left my sleeve, and he ran. Chapter 4. Night in the Gilman House, Flight Across the Roofs. Part 13. No bus tonight. It was time to leave. I didn't want to know what was coming for us. I ran back to the town square, hoping to make the 8 p.m. bus pickup. Reaching the square, however, the bus arrived with punctuality, but an additional delivery of bad news. Joe Sargent told me plainly the engine was done for the night. I was stuck. No trains, no taxis. I was directed to the inn across the courtyard. The clerk at the Gilman house slid me a key to a fourth-floor room, rear side, 2 connecting doors, no running water. The bolt on the hall door had been removed recently. The scars in the wood were fresh. I transplanted a spare bolt from the closet door. a small craft against a larger tide. I ate soup in the only open cafe, read a paper I didn't absorb, and went back to a room that smelled mossy with old damp cloth. I kept my coat on and put my flashlight in my trouser pocket so I could find the watch face in the dark. I turned the lamp off to conserve my nerves. Then the power cut out. I lay in the dark, awake, listening. After a long, long time, I heard it. A key testing my lock, soft and patient. Then a door opening in the room to the north. A gentle nudge at the connecting door. My bolt held. The same routine in the room to the south. A pause. Bare boards groaned as weight eased down the corridor. The knock at my door came later, accompanied by low croaks that weren't quite words. Polite in the beginning, then became a determined pounding on the frame. I suddenly noticed the smell of fish and cold brine, old scales and cellar damp, getting thicker. In a panic, I hit the connecting door with my shoulder, splintering the wood on my third try until the frame let go. I ran through several connecting rooms, bolted down the hall, running for the room at the end, the one whose window faced the lower roof I'd studied from the courtyard. I knew I would be able to make the jump. I made it inside, but my pursuer was already undoing the lock. I was being followed, chased. I couldn't make it to the window, no time. I shoved a bed frame and dragged a dresser in front of the doorway, then ran to the far connecting room. Thank God it was unlocked. Slammed and bolted the last hall door just as a key turned on the other side. I opened the window, not the one I intended to flee from, but I had no choice. I was met with a 4-story drop to the cobblestone square and a gap too far to jump to the warehouse roof across the alleyway. No fire escape. Above the window frame, however, heavy velour curtains hung from a brass pole, the kind of decorative decision you only appreciate when it becomes a tool for an emergency. I ripped the curtains free, hooked 2 brass rings over the exterior shutter's iron catch, and let the fabric cascade and snag on the roofline of the abutting warehouse. Behind me, wood gave way in a splintered storm. Across the square, 3 steeples lit up as if cued. The cupola of the Gilman house answered with a lantern glow. I swung out and slid, palms burning into cold moonlight, landing on the warehouse roof. Part 14. The Courtyard and Streets. I crossed loose slates of roof tile and slid into a gaping skylight, dropping into a warehouse that smelled of dust and fish oil, then hurried down the stairs to the back door. I stopped when I saw the crowd, hiding behind a barrel, peering into the square. In the courtyard, lanterns bobbed and voices croaked in a cadence my ears refused to admit as language. Fish-like figures poured from the hotel. Some crouched, heavy-shouldered, moving with a swing of arms that seemed optional rather than required. Others, tall, with skin like moss and tentacles where a face should be. But there were a few that donned the appearance of the fabled sirens from Greek mythology. Dangerous. Deadly. She wore a crown I recognized without wanting to. I moved like a shadow as I sealed myself into a side building and exited through shuttered windows, receding each shutter from the outside to muzzle my path. On Washington Street, the night was full of sounds. Feet, yes, but also a wet pattering that wasn't feet. Far out on Devil Reef, lights winked in a pattern, signals. The Gilman's cupola replied with its stuttering gleam. Short, long, long, short, as if the roof had learned to speak maritime. The town and the sea had been carrying on a conversation for a century and had only now raised their voices enough for me to overhear. Part 15. The Open Square. I had to cross an open square bathed in hard moonlight. No way around. I copied the town's shamble. Shoulders loose, head forward, feet set wide, gaze unfocused, and walked. The water lay bright at the end of South Street like a road to somewhere truer. In the corner of my vision, the water lay like polished steel. I made the mistake of looking directly at it. The surface between breakwater and reef wasn't empty. It was busied with creatures that barely seemed human. Heads and shoulders above the water's surface, hundreds were swimming toward town, advancing in a slow, tireless crawl. I started to run, caught myself, and slid back into the shamble before being spotted as an imposter, breath hitching, hands open. Don't run, don't run. Part 16, Toward the Tracks. Pursuit gathered on Federal Street. A car chugged past, engine coughing, loaded with bodies. I needed a way out that wasn't a road. They were all blocked by these creatures and ill-formed townsfolk. I needed an exit path no one would think to watch. I remembered the abandoned train rail from the view in my room, the long covered bridge over the gorge, the weed-choked embankment narrowing into marsh. If it wasn't patrolled, it was my only chance. I slipped away from the crowd and shadows. I took the back streets, Babson to Lafayette to Adams to Bank, hugging the warehouse walls. The river roared beside the warehouse canyon. The old station loomed, a brick carcass bathed in smoke blue. The rails beyond were iron bones under tattered weeds. The covered bridge swallowed me and filled with the leathery storm of bats. Halfway across, a gap opened, ties missing into a black drop. There was only the one jump. I made it by the faith a body sometimes has in itself. Beyond the bridge, the rail line ran into marsh and low sandy cuts with overgrown brush. Somewhere to my right, the Rowley Road came near. The smell returned. Not fish, not exactly. More the memory of the sea concentrating itself into air. Voices approached, not words, but a syntax of croak and bark that carried meaning like a tide carries boats. I crouched in the deepest brush and told myself the childish instruction that sometimes works. Keep your eyes shut as the nightmare passes. Like being a child again with the blanket over my head, the logic simple and almost believable. If I can't see them, they can't see me. I failed to keep them closed. Curiosity is older than self-preservation. In the crossing where the road met the tracks, a line of figures flowed by under the bright, indifferent moon. They were the color of wet stone, bellies pale, their backs ridged like armor grown rather than forged. Their limbs ended in webbed hands that gripped sand and tie in turn. Gills worked along their necks with a patient opening and closing, as if breathing air were merely a second language. Some wore robes that made sense only if water could carry fabric differently than air. A few wore crowns of that same pale metal. The one in front wore a crushed felt hat and a black coat that had learned his contours too well, like a human disguise that had learned how to lie. My vision began to blur. I lost periphery. The night contracted to a needle point. Then it went out. Chapter 5, The Long Pull of the Sea. Part 17, Rain and Distance. I woke to soft rain stippling the weeds, courteous and ordinary. In the mud, there were no prints, washed away or never made. The smell had thinned to the usual world. On the horizon, Innsmouth's roofs lay flat and gray like a mouthful of broken teeth. I rose and walked. I walked for quite some time away from that town. I walked until I eventually entered Rowley. It was evening by then, feet sore, body aching, but I was relieved. At the diner, I was given hot soup that didn't taste of fear, and made my way to the train station that accepted cash without questions. A trip back to Arkham, then Boston. Along the route, I talked to men who took notes and asked careful, neutral questions. Less than halfway on my journey, I fell into a long, comforting sleep until I finally arrived in Arkham. The weight lifted in knowing I was far away from it all, far from that nightmare. A month later, the papers told rumors of raids and demolitions at Innsmouth. Headlines that were loud but strangely vague, then jokes about bootleggers. Obvious, then quickly, oddly, fell flat. Part 18. Names in the tree. I should have left the rest alone. But I had my own ledger to balance, an errand to run. Genealogy. I wanted to gather a list of names to write on my family tree. In Arkham's Historical Society building, the curator gave my grandmother's maiden family name with interest. Marsh, an orphaned family branch with money from nowhere, a French governess who didn't answer questions about her origins, and records that dissolved when you pursued them into New Hampshire. "You've got the eyes, kid," the curator blurted out, meaning some trick of iris or light I refused to recognize. I smiled politely and changed the subject while writing down dates. Part 19. The Safe Deposit Box. Back in Ohio, my uncle kept my late grandmother's papers in a bank vault. Traveling together, we went into the vault room and explored. Letters, silhouettes, photographs, heirlooms with silvered edges that bit the fingers if you held them in wrong light. A silvered photograph of the French governess, my grandmother, who always unsettled me as a child, stared out at me with a wide-eyed, glazed look I suddenly recognized, but was too afraid to name. We noticed a smaller box within, opened it, and he hesitated over the bundled object, as if expecting the past to shout his name. When he unwrapped it, the crown inside engaged the room. Pale gold metal with the exact wrong warmth. The curves I knew too well. The same, not quite human heraldry. I folded to the floor as if gravity had finally collected back rent. It would take some time to recoup after what I just discovered. Part 20. Dreams and Mirrors. I tried to outwork my thoughts. Told myself it was a coincidence that Zadok Allen was just an old drunk with a gift for imagination. I took a job in an insurance office, hid inside forms and predictable days. For 2 years, I fought off these reflections with partial success. My mind was quiet, at peace. Then the dreams started, arriving on their own schedule. In them, I moved through halls of stone underwater, columns thick as sequoias, furred with weed and luminous moss, vaults lit by a drifting gelatinous light. Fish with wise, unkind eyes slid past like familiars. I wore robes and a tiara of that same pale metal, knelt and prayed willingly to altars where the carvings matched the ones I'd tried not to remember. A sea-bottom temple whose pillars were too thick for gravity and whose domes breathed. When I woke, I went to the mirror and recounted changes on my face. The whites of my eyes seemed brighter. The irises held their gleam a bit too long. Fine creases at the sides of my neck shaped themselves in angles I didn't want to trace. My father watched me sometimes when he thought I couldn't see. A look of worry, but also of waiting. On a particularly bad morning, the looking glass answered a question I refused to ask. I had the Innsmouth look. I thought of my cousin Lawrence, now locked away in the Canton madhouse due to his change, echoing our grandmother's face. My uncle Douglas, who, comparing his affliction to a plague for which there was no cure, save for a quick end with a revolver, ended his life before he turned. I bought a pistol and left it in a drawer I never opened. Part 21. The Invitation. The terror lessened in a way that scared me more. The dreams became grand tours instead of hauntings. In one dream, my grandmother greeted me in a palace grown from coral, set on terraces that faced dark avenues where lights moved by their own tides. She told me the city's name, Yihantlei, and said it had been wounded, but not ended, by what the men in uniforms did from their steel ships, shooting death into the sea. She said longevity is a matter of choosing where to live. She said I had been trying to breathe 2 kinds of air for too long. Another name surfaced, Pithayali, living now for over 80,000 years, our ancestor. An ancestor old enough to make the word ancient feel new. She told me Pithayali stormed the town after the death of Obed Marsh, leveling it in vengeance for what they did to him. It was her and her followers, not the fabled news stories of plague, that changed the town from that day, breeding a new era of kin that would have a home in both sea and land. She showed me, for the present, the city under the sea would rest, but someday they would rise again for the tribute great Cthulhu craved. It would be a city greater than Innsmouth next time. They had planned to spread, and had brought up that which would help them. But now they must wait once more. This was the dream in which I saw a Shoggoth for the first time. These were the beings Zadok spoke of, the things being stored in warehouses. The sight set me awake in haste. I woke with the sensation far replaced by dread, a different pressure entirely. It was not fear, but rather homesickness. I suddenly realized that awful night I spent in Innsmouth years back. I was never in any danger. I felt now they knew I was there, and they were welcoming me to their family. The ocean had put a hand on my shoulder and reminded me I was never properly introduced. Part 22. The RSVP. I won't use the pistol. I won't let anyone lock me behind a sanitarium door the way they locked up my cousin. I shall take my leave before I make the full change, before my father has a chance to put me away. My new endeavor. I'm going to bring my cousin out of the Canton madhouse. Then we will go east. We won't linger in town, head straight to Innsmouth. We'll swim out under a quiet moon to the reef and dive, finding the place where the current runs like a hallway. We'll travel down to the gates of Yahanthle, with the black lanterns and the carvings that read like poems to those who can read them. Stupendous and unheard of splendors await us below, and I shall seek them soon. Irelie, Cthulhu Ftang. Yeah. We'll live long enough to call it living. I am appalled of what I used to be, now hungry for what I am. If you read about raids and demolitions, understand this. You can tear down a house, you can sink a stone, but cities under pressure learn to wait, and the sea has all the time there is.
This concludes The Shadow over Innsmouth, a modern language retelling of H.P. Lovecraft's novella. To truly enjoy the tale of The Shadow over Innsmouth, we encourage you, the listener, to either read or listen to the full descriptive artwork of H.P. Lovecraft's original writing, to truly enjoy its majesty. Now knowing the premise of the whole story, withstanding, some portions of this retelling were adjusted with artistic liberties. We hope you can take heart the root of this tale. The goal it to light the fire in your curious mind, to have you adventure into a sea of the unknown, and satiate your appetite of the unknown and the macabre. This project is dedicated to my loving and supportive wife, Melanie. Without you, my mind would cascade into a sea of madness, of which mortals are not meant to cross. From the bottom, top and all, of my heart, I thank you for keeping me grounded and allowing me to explore the depths of my creativity. You are a blessing. I hope you enjoyed this tale and the efforts made to make a connection from my passion to yours. You are, and forever will be, my cara mia,